timing's kind of critical. So we welcome members of the working group, our staff and consultants, and members of the public who may be watching the live stream of this. And we remind you that this meeting is being recorded so that anybody from the public can look at it later and see what the nature of our discussions has been. So let me just start by giving a little overview of where we are in the process and what we're going to accomplish today. First of all, we've outlined for you in the past this 5-stage master planning process. Stage 1 was to gather information, do kind of a deep dive into what's been done up to this point, and identify constraints and opportunities. The second stage was to develop 3 scenarios that explored different urban forms, different ideas, different land mixes, and be able to do some evaluation into those to see how they perform. And we've now completed those first 2 stages. We're heading now into stage 3, which is taking the information that we've learned from stage 2 and selecting kind of a preferred alternative or the framework that we want to build around. That'll take place over the next month plus. Then stage 4 is taking that preferred alternative and turning the dials to see if we can optimize it and make sure that it works as effectively and efficiently as possible. And stage 5 is putting it together into the framework master plan and supporting documentation. So as I said, this is really a pretty critical stage right now and a critical meeting. We're going to be taking the scenarios that you've seen. Today we'll just very briefly, and I think 10 minutes at the most, go through what those scenarios are and remind you of what we've looked at in the past. And then we're going to show you the evaluation that we've gone through of those scenarios, 25 different criteria that have been considered, and we can show how the different approaches perform relative to those criteria. We'll be seeking your input on which elements from those various criteria should be carried forward into our preferred alternative. So this isn't an exercise in voting on your favorite scenario. This is, let's dive in a little bit deeper, look at what works, what doesn't, take the best elements, move them on, identify things that we think don't work, and we can set those aside. So that'll kind of be the first exercise that we'll go through today. And then we want to make sure that we've reserved some time so that we can go through an exercise started last time, which was when we took the key vision elements that you've helped prepare, divided those or broken them down into key principles, and then identified specific initiatives that support those principles and those vision elements. We want to make sure that we are capturing the best ideas now that can be carried forward into our stage 3 preferred alternative. So we'll take kind of the latter half of the meeting to go through that exercise. But again, I think you'll find this interesting. A lot of new information, a lot of new work has gone into it, and you'll be able to provide us some informed feedback this time. So to jump right in, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Kindle from our SOM team. He's joined by Aaron May, and we appreciate them for being here. You've met Steve Kellenberg in the past, who is our planning director, and our communications folks from X Factor, who are helping make sure the technology works. And so with that, Peter, I'll turn it to you and let you kind of run through that first piece, quickly going through a summary of where we've been with those 3 options, and then diving into the details of the evaluation.
Great, thank you, Alan. and great to see everybody again. I also want to introduce Arthi Gowda from our, she's our sustainable lead on the project. We asked her to join today because of the subject matter. And as Alan mentioned, I'll walk through a quick summary of the three schemes or three concepts. Let me just go to full screen mode. And as Alan mentioned, we are at an important juncture in the project. We've developed three framework plan alternates or concepts. And I think, as you may recall, they're based on different economic positioning for the project. The first one we call complete community. The second one has a wider catchment called regional hub. And the third one is the most development driven called economic catalyst. The main difference in the three is the percentage of residential versus commercial development. So in the first one, it's 60% residential, 40% commercial. In the last one, it's flipped. It's 40% residential and 60% commercial, and number two is in the middle. That's an important detail that you'll see emerge later in the evaluation. So concept one is what we call the complete community. The idea here really is to create a project that is most responsive to its immediate context. So providing different land uses that complement what's going on right around the site. And secondly, that the land uses are mutually supportive. This is why we have a slightly higher proportion of residential uses in this particular concept, because we know that having a slightly higher percentage of residential yields a better jobs housing balance and also reduces offsite trips. The project in concept one is organized around 7 neighborhoods, which you can see here in the gray color. And the green is the open space system, which is arranged in a more linear manner. And that creates what we call the emerald necklace, which unifies the project together and also provides other benefits such as trail connections and stormwater management. The residential development, as I mentioned, is about 60%. That's shown in brown, and the office is shown in blue. So we have designated the land uses in each parcel. We also have what we're calling cores and centers, which are the retail hubs of each concept. And the idea here is to provide for daily services that are within a close walk of both jobs and housing. And those might look something like this, where they are 2 stories, perhaps 3 stories in some instances, but it's a multi-use, mixed-use core and hub that provides, again, restaurants and retail services to employees in wetlands. In terms of the open space strategies, we have begun preliminary programming for all 3 concepts. You can see that programming diagram here. Because these open spaces are more linear in nature and more have a naturalized design approach, they are generally considered to be more passive in nature. And the interior open spaces we would program for more active functions. So this is an image of what one of those Emerald Necklace Park ideas may look like. We hope it has a stormwater management function, but also a recreational trail function. All 3 concepts have a well-developed road network, and we're also beginning to identify car-free zones, which you can see in the pink color. And these car-free zones would be areas where we would have retail focus and restaurants and other community functions. I think, as everyone knows, there is a planned BRT route across the site shown in red here, and then the yellow line is a secondary circulator, some sort of autonomous vehicle or electric vehicle circulator, which we're very excited about, that might run on roads or potentially off on a separate right-of-way. Due to the population mix, which we anticipate being about 10,000 to 15,000 people, on the site. We do have plans for a school. The location is still being discussed. This is a illustration of the vertical development of the project. Generally, these are 3- and 4-story buildings, but we're hoping at these central core areas that there would be higher buildings and a little more density to provide that focus to each neighborhood. And here you see it with the open space network turned on. The BRT is shown in dotted red lines, and that will cross I-15 at this location at the bottom of the slide, and then exit the site to the north. And we hope and plan on having a regional trail that would link through the project and connect to the Jordan River. So that's a really exciting idea that actually is going to be realized in all 3 concepts. The second concept is what we call the regional hub. And this takes a wider look at the surrounding communities, about a 4 to 5 mile radius, and examines the types of land uses that might be appropriate within that catchment area. We generally know that the housing in that catchment area is mostly single family. So one idea is to provide additional multifamily housing. But the other 2 important ideas about the regional hub is that they provide a retail and entertainment attraction that would support the surrounding communities, and then also a more significant open space element, a sports park. And that sports park would be up here in the northwest. The entertainment and retail piece, as you'll see in a minute, would be more in the center. The other thing we are excited about with this concept is that trail, that regional trail that would link the river to the foothill parks, is a very prominent design feature of this concept. You can see it running right through the middle of the project. The retail that I mentioned is located here at the center. It might bracket that regional trail and create kind of this unified entertainment and recreational amenity. We've also introduced an institutional anchor in concept 2, and you can see that in the dark blue color on the right-hand side. The cores and centers would be a little more extensive in concept 2. You can see there's a little more red and pink here, and that just simply indicates that that's where this main project core is. And that might include gathering places such as this that is off that park. So it'll be a mix of both more urban style public spaces, but also a linear park system. We also hope that main linear park can manage and help control stormwater. So it acts almost as a tributary to the Jordan River, ending in a wetland park down at the bottom. And here you can see that sports park with the sports fields actually shown. These would not be tournament level sports fields. They would be probably striped and demarcated in some way, but they're not going to be lighted with extensive infrastructure around them. And then the remainder of the open spaces, again, would be programmed spaces that have a slightly more focused landscape approach to them. The linear park that would connect through the middle of the site might look something like this, generally be oriented towards bicyclists. We're hoping that maybe there could even be some grade separation between certain roads and bike trails, as you can see on the right-hand side. And then complementing that more naturalized and regional open space idea would be more urban parks such as this, smaller scale open spaces that complement that larger green space. Again, the opportunities for car-free areas exist in the core areas of the project that we're very excited about that could then complement those larger green spaces. This one takes a slightly different approach to the micro-mobility strategy, where we would introduce what we're calling an active mobility corridor. And that might be a bike and pedestrian loop that links together the whole project. Maybe it would have a very light electric vehicle as a shuttle on there. We're still kind of working through what that could be. The BRT, you can see again in the red, would go right through the center of the project and actually travel on a boulevard through the development area. In this option, you can see the institution and anchor tenant more to the east here, shown in purple, and then the school location touching that regional trail link and that green space so that students have an opportunity to get to school without having to walk on roads. Here you can see the three-dimensional development of this idea. Again, that sports and community park that's a little bit larger in this concept. To the northwest, the connection over to the Jordan River, and then that bike trail coming through the center of the project, touching that core area, and then jumping over I-15 and connecting up to the, again, the foothill parks and trails. Concept 3 is what we call the economic catalyst. And as I mentioned, this is the most ambitious from a programming standpoint and from a development standpoint. We see this really as a third hub between Provo and Salt Lake, having a strong institutional or academic alliance. And the formative concept behind this one is really maximizing development potential. So because of that, it does have a higher proportion, 256 acres of commercial development, and it also has a relatively low amount of residential. As I mentioned earlier, 40% residential. Because it's more growth oriented, it does have the smallest percentage of open space. So about 20% of the project would be open space and about 60% developable area. It also has the most, as I mentioned, commercial and office uses that are organized around a central core and a pretty significant central park, which you can see here in the center of the drawing. It has an institutional anchor, and then also to the northeast, what we're calling an innovation accelerator, which would be a second innovation-based hub that would be more on the R&D and product development side of things. And the institutional buildings might look something like this. This is from Mission Bay in California, which has a significant institutional presence. But this gives you an indication of the height and scale of probably some of the buildings in these institutional areas, and also the office elements. The core and center in this concept really is quite distinct. You can see it there in the middle around that green Central Park. That Central Park is quite big. It would be about 5 or 6 acres in size, about 700 or 800 feet in the long dimension. And then we see complementing that Central Park, what we're calling the Hive. And that would be a mixed use building that has taller, is taller. It would probably be the tallest building in the project. It would also have multiple functions, school, incubator, social hub, lecture hall, really act as a focal point for this economic catalyst idea. Because this one has the smallest amount of open space, it does require a little more thinking in terms of how the open space is programmed. Here you can see some first thoughts on how that might be accomplished. But we do feel pretty comfortable we can get some usable recreational amenities in most of these parks. It'll just be a little more limited than some of the other concepts. The Central Park may also have other community functions and activities lined by restaurants, as you can see here, and retail, but also just simply providing this respite from the development and also a gathering place. Because concept 3 has the lowest amount of open space, we're a little more challenged in terms of how we can manage stormwater. So we're looking for a significant green infrastructure element to help us manage that water that falls on the site, also the snowfall, and really conserve the water. The other interesting attribute of concept 3 is this quite significant car-free area in the center of the project. So the Central Park plus the Hive building and these other complementary functions, together with this car-free environment, we think will be a real signature of the project in this concept, and we're excited about that. And that may include places like this, informal dining, outdoor dining in the summer. Really, I think an exciting environment. This also does have the most significant institutional zone. In this case, it's predominantly oriented to the south, and the school, the K through 12 or K through 8 school, would be shown here in purple somewhere on the west side of that central boulevard. And the institutional elements, again, may look something like this if it has more of an educational focus. This is from our project in Merced, California, the University of California, Merced, where there's libraries and research buildings and other institutional amenities. So here you can see the three-dimensional test fit, we call it, of concept 3. So you can see those taller buildings, slightly more dense development around that central park. You again see the scale of that central park. It's pretty significant. The BRT would run right through that central zone and then exit the site to the north. And the Jordan River connection would still be there, but it's a little more constrained, as I mentioned, and may not have the capacity for significant naturalized areas or stormwater management, but it still would be there as a recreational connection. So those are the 3 options, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have on the 3.
So this was kind of a review of where we were last time to make sure that we're up to speed. So before we go into showing how we've evaluated these concepts, any general questions or comments?
Ellen, I have one, and sorry I wasn't at the last session, but I'm curious why the commercial and residential are so segregated rather than having buildings that integrate them, like ground floor commercial, upper story residential.
Pete and Steve, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, it's a discussion we've been having. For this round, we will have mixed use development like that. Just for this round, we've only begun to indicate that in the drawings, but it's definitely something we want, and something we've recommended be a part of these core areas. So even though you're just seeing red in certain areas on these plans, there actually would be additional retail in some of the neighborhoods.
But I would add that if where you see red, I think you should, in your mind's eye, see it as a large percentage of mixed use in those areas.
Yeah.
So that red think of it as what's going on the ground floor, not necessarily what's going on all the floors. It's just, it got really complicated to try and break down mixed use at this level.
And when you say mixed use, are you talking mostly about retail, residential, or are you talking about workspace, like other kinds of work areas that sort of live work integration?
I think we're talking mostly about retail on the ground floor of apartment buildings and of office buildings. The opportunity for some integrated, work share and integrated live work. I mean, those are still possibilities, but the primary mixed use would be ground floor use over commercial and under commercial and residential.
Thank you.
Candace, you get your hand up.
Thank you. And thank you for going over this again, Peter. This was super helpful, even though I saw it at the last meeting. I just want to I guess, keep beating the water-wise drum of, in these open space places, the more that we can use water-wise landscaping. And I recognize that those are difficult pictures to find and all those things, but, thinking of natural trails rather than grassy banks. Sometimes I wish I lived in Washington and we could do that more easily, but I think the reality is that we don't. So that would be my only comment, is that, water-wise drum.
It's a great comment. We absolutely agree. And I think as you see this refined a little further, see that's what we've got in mind. Probably not going to be a lot of big turf areas that require a lot of water, a lot more native plants. And as we get into details, you and your team are going to be helpful in that.
Yeah, and one other thing, in areas where there are turf, I would just set in a webinar from Kelly Cope up at USU about water-wise turf, some turf that requires less water use. So there's a lot of interesting research going on up at USU. And not saying that we can't have any turf. I totally recognize active play areas and those type of things, that there is a place for it, just not the default is my plea.
I think we're on the same page there, Candace.
Yeah, totally on the same page. Yep.
Good. Soren.
Yeah, thank you, Alan, and really appreciate a great presentation overview. I sat in on the one a couple of weeks ago with the entire stakeholder group, so these look very familiar. I had a couple of thoughts. One is just kind of building on what Candace just said, and that is really thinking about the images and the nature of water use in an area where water is both decreasing in its availability because of climate change impacts and increasing in demand because of just the growth of the region. And so be very conscientious about images that are used to portray ideas, that they really reflect the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
I love the ideas around green infrastructure that you've got worked in, particularly as we think about runoff and how those can be, elements of natural landscapes as well. Would love to see some of the imagery reflect what that green infrastructure might look like as edges of maybe turfed areas and things like that, as you start to develop very project specific kind of imagery. The other comments I have really have to do with placement. In terms of school, we're working pretty actively with the Jordan River Commission and developing citizen science programs with elementary and secondary schools. I presume the school you're looking at here would be an elementary level institution. And think really carefully about the placement of that school and the connectivity. I know you've, in all of these schemes, have connections to the Galena Preserve and the Jordan River Parkway. We're hoping to really see schools that are located near the river really take advantage of opportunities for hands-on science curriculum, which was recently adopted as a really important core science standard in the state. These are important opportunities for students to be involved in bird monitoring and wildlife monitoring and habitat, understanding hydrology and how water systems work, and what better place to do it right here where the range to river connections are so close, and also thinking about how this green infrastructure could be part of education opportunities as well, and demonstrate things that people could eventually implement in their own households. Kind of along the lines of what Candace said, I don't know if you have this in your resource library, but look at the localscapes documentation that's been prepared by Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. I think that could apply to very small landscapes around buildings and buffers, but also to very large landscapes like active parks and play areas and things like that. In other words, focusing turf where it's needed, but really looking at other more natural and native and water conserving landscapes around.
What was the name? Sorry, Soren, what was the name of that organization?
It's Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, and the
Okay.
document and program they've developed is called Localscapes.
Okay.
Really fantastic program that kind of gets at this. A couple of other thoughts that have to do more with air quality, and I think that's part of the focus. I see in at least the complete community really the idea of buffering the freeway and the Bangerter Highway, I-15 and Bangerter Highway. I don't know how familiar you are with a lot of the airshed research that's been going on over the last probably almost close to 3 decades now, that really was initiated in Utah and is happening all over the country. MIT and USC have been particularly focused on this. But the real health impacts of major freeway and rail corridors in terms of heart disease, lung disease, cancer, and things like that, buffering from these heavy transportation corridors becomes essential to well-being when people are spending large numbers of hours a day or at night in close proximity to these corridors that produce a lot of fine particulate matters. Typically, the buffers that are recommended in most of the research that I've seen is in the range of 600 feet. Or about 200 meters or so from those heavy transportation corridors. So I don't know how that might affect the layout and the planning, but some of these look like buildings are getting up fairly close to the freeway, and I think that kind of buffer and setback would be appropriate in all of these scenarios.
Do you think, Soren, do you mind?
Yeah.
That's a pretty big idea, because it would cause the loss of obviously millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars of valuable real estate impact on the project. The plans to so far basically orient mostly non-residential and commercial uses adjacent to the interstate, where do you think first of all, do you think it's the same issue, given the ability for it's less duration of stay, and also the ability for commercial buildings to process air quality mechanically?
Sure, those are all factors, and it certainly could be an influence in the design of mechanical systems. I think generally, and I might suggest connecting with Arden Pope at Brigham Young University. He was really doing a lot of the foundational work around this research that's now happening all over the country and has been for a couple of decades in terms of buffering from polluting corridors like a freeway or a heavy rail corridor. Would definitely put him on your list of people to connect with, to look at the latest research. I don't consider myself an expert on it, but having worked around land use and public policy for 3 decades in Utah, and understanding air quality at any level is a health impact, but particularly in areas where it's such a heightened impact, I think it's worth investigating, because it does affect people's lives and livelihood, especially young people and aging individuals that are more affected by fine particulate matter. It certainly can have an economic impact in terms of land, but I think we're in a state and a region that values life at least as equal to land value, and so I think that really should be a factor and a focus of this project as a demonstration of best practices. So, I just offer that as a suggestion for further consideration and research. The last one, it kind of ties into that as well. And I know I've brought this up before. We should be thinking in at least 2 of these scenarios, the regional hub and the economic catalyst, of having a front runner station at the doorstep of this development, not relying on a BRT. As somebody that's spent about 15 years living without a car, as my primary mode of transportation, and having worked on the design of Front Runner and several of the rail projects as an urban designer and architect and planner, I know it's not currently on the radar for UTA to be thinking about, but if we're serious about air quality and regional connectivity, I don't think you can be looking at a development like this that doesn't have a more direct connection to our regional rail system. which is, that's what Front Runner is intended to do, is to serve places like this. And every transfer is a disincentive to use rail. So if this is a regional destination, which concept 2 and concept 3 tend to focus on, then I think we have to be considering, at least long range, how the rail system can eventually serve this, even if it's not contemplated presently. So those are a few thoughts, kind of around environment, sustainability, air quality, watershed issues.
Thank you, Soren. Those
Yeah.
get good things to add. Thank you. Glade?
Yeah, I hope, sorry, what's that?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, just real quickly. I guess I've been struck during the pandemic and working at home over the last year. My family lives kind of in the Liberty Park area. I've slowly worked my way around the park, and so there's a lot of active transportation down here, and those are the kinds of things that have drawn us to this area. And yet I've been struck as an air quality specialist, just how many times I still start my car and have that cold start event that leads to, VOC and NOx emissions and whatnot. And so I'm heartened to see in these concepts, a lot of active transportation and short distance to, certain destinations. And just from anecdotally, if you'll indulge me, just things like being able to walk to the grocery store have a huge impact on how many starts I do a day. And I'm sure in kind of the urban planning sphere, this is all well accounted for, and you seem to capture those concepts. And yet, I just wanted to just point out anecdotally that it really, we still find ourselves reaching for the car keys more often than I kind of expected we would. And so whatever you can do to sort of anticipate that type of behavior and really, especially have some of those needs that you might need every day or so at hand, walkable, really could have a big impact, I think.
Really good points, Glade. Thank you. And that is something that we've been given a lot of consideration to. And in fact, you'll see some of that being evaluated in this next section. So thanks. Very good points. And that's a terrific overview. I think at this point now, we're going to kind of go in and dive deeper into each of these concepts and show how they perform relative to various key criteria we've identified. And then we look forward to maybe a little more discussion on some of those details. So Pete, turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Alan. As part of our stage 2 conclusions, we did undertake an evaluation of the 3 options. And the idea was to create a set of criteria that allowed us to objectively analyze the benefits of each concept. So the basic methodology was to develop the framework plans. We then assigned a series of planning parameters to them, and then we performed analytics to varying degrees on those parameters. And again, the goal was to create an objective set of criteria that would allow us to see which concept was performing better against these 25 criteria. So here you see the 25 criteria that we developed. They're grouped into 5 categories here on the left that correlate approximately with some of the key vision elements. We then determined what the specific criteria was in this middle column, and then identified a metric by which we would measure that criteria. And then we gave it a score. And for the purposes of this round of work, we kept the scoring pretty simple, conceptually simple. We just scored the best performing concept with a 3, and when the worst performing concept with a 1, and the middle one got a 2. So very simple kind of methodology. What that tended to do was exaggerate the differences between the schemes, as you'll see as I go through them. However, what it did do was, through that exaggeration, did give us a clearer picture of which scheme was performing better. So I'll go through these pretty quick. Please feel free to stop me at at any time. So criteria 1 was daily external car trips. This is critically important in terms of air quality, and is dependent on the land use mix. You can see concept 1 performed much better than the other 2 concepts because of that land use mix. Having residential here creates fewer external car trips. That's the simple reason why this one did so much better, by about 20,000 trips per day. The second criteria is intersection density. And planners typically look at something like this because it's a measure of what I call porosity of the plan, meaning how easily is it to move through the plan without a car, both with a car and without a car, but simply a measure of movement. And in this concept, the intersection density, this criteria, the intersection density was highest on concept 2. I will note on many of these criterias in the next round, stage 3, we will be able to design all of the concepts or the preferred concept according to some of the lessons learned here. So we know that more intersections create higher porosity. Criteria T3 in our transportation segment was daily internal trip capture. This is related to offsite trips, but concept 2 performed the best in internal trip capture, and we believe the reason is because it does have that higher percentage of retail that serves a regional need. So I think, Glade, you were just talking about having things on site that allow a person to meet their daily needs, so you don't need to reach for those car keys. And that's exactly what this criteria gets at. So if we can design the land uses in a way that reduce to the maximum amount the daily offsite trips, then we'll increase that capture. Car-free zones is really, again, a design opportunity. In the 3 concepts we developed, number 3 actually performed the best because it had that central, that very significant central car-free zone around that central park. So we've also provided the takeaway up here in red of the criteria, what we learned essentially from that analytic. And then criteria T5, access to BRT stations. So this is simply measuring for each concept how many people or the percentage of land are within a 5-minute walk of BRT according to the current design. And what we learned is that concept 2 performed the best. They all did pretty well. But we think concept 2 did the best because the development footprint's a little more reduced. By introducing that regional park in the Northwest, it forced us to compress the development footprint, resulting in a higher walk capture to BRT. At the end of each criteria tranche, we did summarize some of our recommendations. These are preliminary recommendations, open to comment from you. So the conclusions and recommendations are that residential land use must remain a portion of the project program. Number 2, create the smallest reasonable block to facilitate connectivity in the project. Number 3, adopt a regional retail mix that reduces or increases that on-site capture. Number 4, access to BRT, minimize large open spaces near BRT. And this sounds incredibly logical, but we want to maximize development immediately adjacent to BRT to accelerate that use. And then number 5, selectively eliminate some automobile roads to create meaningful car-free zones. The second set of criteria is the community evaluation. This is more around land use. So the first is access to retail. So again, getting back to something Glade mentioned, each of these black dots represent a a sub-district hub or a mixed-use hub. Somebody raised the issue of vertical mixed use. These are where that would occur, where these black dots are. So this is simply measuring from residential or mixed-use designations, which are shown in orange, how easy it is it to get to that retail, so you don't have to drive. And in concept 2, we know that 100% of the people that would reside here or from the mixed use parcels, 100% of them are within a 5-minute walk of that mixed use core or sub-district hub. We looked at jobs housing balance as well, criteria C2. The typical jobs housing proportion in the Wasatch area is somewhere in the mid 1.5, between 1.5 and 2, we understand. In this project, we do, because it's more commercially focused, we do have a high jobs creation number. Generally, you can see it's in the 30,000 range. And so when we create the most amount of households to go with those jobs, we get the smaller number here. So the jobs per household is more in balance. So concept 1 performed the best on this metric because it has the highest proportion of residential. So that was criteria C2. The next 2 criteria really just looked at, again, access and walkability. So this is simply access to a district center from the entire development area. And in this option, concept 2, in this criteria, concept 2 performed the best. Again, we think that's because of the compressed development footprint, accelerates and enhances the walkability of the project. The next one is just understanding how far everybody is from the project center. And one of our original principles was to have a clear center here, clear identity for the project. In option 3, that's incredibly clear, concept 3, with that strong central park. But project centers also exist in the other 2. And in this case, concept 2, the regional hub, performed the best. About 32% of the people are within a 5-minute walk of that project center. So that's really great. And then criteria C5 is looking really at a straight line evaluation of how much retail there is. Retail and hotel uses. The pink is a hotel land use. And in this case, of course, concept 2 performed the best. It has the largest commitment to sort of a mixed use entertainment and hotel district. And that, again, addressed this idea of meeting the needs of workers and residents on site to reduce those off-site trips. So the recommendations from this set of criteria are to maintain the residential, non-residential mix, implement a land use mix that creates the best proportion of jobs to housing, and implement multiple district-based sub-centers. That's a really important concept. Concentrate the development footprint. So rather than develop the entire site, concentrate that into, say, 50 to 55% of the overall site area, and then include a significant mixed use component to reduce off-site trips. The third set of criteria is sustainability. We did look at solar access. This is really dependent on building design, and we think it might be better optimized in stage 3, the next stage, but we did run this evaluation based on the building design that we did create for each of the 3 options. This is basically measuring rooftop potential for solar. In this case, concept 2 performed the best, but again, they're relatively close together, so we think we can get all of them to perform at a high level. And the same with sustainable criteria 2 is daylight penetration into buildings. We know this is an indicator of employee satisfaction and also energy savings. And this is, again, related to the final building dimensions and layout. So we think this will be optimized in stage 3. The third sustainable criteria is vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. The goal is to reduce VMT, and VMT really is a measure of the project's impact on the surrounding road network as measured through vehicle miles traveled. In this case, concept 1 edged out the other two very, very closely. You can see they're almost exactly the same, with 87.9 million VMT on all 3 of them. So again, the difference is quite small.
But this is the VMT for 4 counties, not just for the project, right?
Yeah, includes VMT for all of Utah, Salt Lake, Davis, and Weber counties. Yep. The fourth sustainability criteria was the capability of the project to manage and conserve water. Concept 1 was really designed with that intention in mind through these more linear, naturalized corridors. So that performed the best. But again, we think with a little bit of work, we can make the other 2 also perform well. Concept 3 is the least amenable to a more naturalized and daylighted water management concept, but again, it would require a little more green infrastructure work. Concept 2 kind of splits the difference and does both well. The fifth sustainable criteria had to do with pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, and the methodology for this was to lay a grid over the site and measure then the distance between each cell using the road or trail network. And that gave us a heat map that indicated which cells were the most accessible or most connected to all the other cells. All of them did pretty well. I think because we have a nice clear road network and sidewalk network on all of them, but also we've indicated trail locations. So we see the trails and sidewalks really acting together. Generally, they performed that about over half the cells are within a 15-minute walk of all the other cells. So that's we think that that's well on its way to becoming an important design characteristic. So the preliminary recommendations from sustainability consider building orientation, height, design, layout, as we refine the concept in stage 3. Again, this one comes up several times: maintain the residential and non-residential land use mix. A portion of the open space should be designed to accommodate overland or naturalized stormwater management, and then design for full and seamless connectivity between trails and sidewalks. We looked at open space in the fourth set around both the configuration and the access to open space. So this simply measured distance to open space from any point on the project. And in this evaluation, concept 1 was the strongest. Again, because it has this more dispersed linear open space design. So nowhere in the project were you more than 113, or I'm sorry, the average distance from anywhere in the project was 113 feet, which is quite nice. The second criteria had to do with programmability of the spaces. This really looked at the shape of the open spaces, their location. This has to do with what we talked about earlier, which indicates maybe more open spaces, these open spaces having a slightly more maintained or turf facing character. But we felt that option 2 or concept 2 had the most, not only the most area that was amenable to some sort of programming, but had the best configuration. Open space criteria 3 had to do with trail connectivity. This indicates preliminary trail design or pathway designs for each of the options. And of course, as is evident by the graphic, concept 1 had the most linear feet of trails, but actually they all did okay. And again, this would be a design refinement that we can optimize in stage 3. And this evaluation looked at ecology and biodiversity potential. Now, this was a slightly more subjective evaluation, but it really, our landscape team looked at each of the design options and asked what the biodiversity potential was in the various spaces within the plan. And they felt in this case that concept 2 had the most potential for biodiversity creation and optimization. And then the 5th one looked at proximity to open space. This really looked at the percent of the development area that was within 200 feet of an open space. So it's a little different than just distance. It speaks more to the general proximity of the project to open space. And in this case, concept 1 performed slightly better. Again, we think because it has a slightly more developed or extensive green corridor network that penetrated these development zones a little more extensively. So the takeaway on the 4th tranche of criteria were that we need to have a significant proportion of small parks and connective greenways to create that open space penetration, but also create the bike and pedestrian connectivity that we're looking for. Then complementing that with a series of what we're calling district parks that would be 3 to 4 acres in size. These are more programmable open spaces. And then finally, the third ingredient in the open space system would be a larger linear system that is able to be naturalized and support stormwater conveyance and water conservation. And within that third element of the open space system, that's where we commit to native landscaping, the waterwise design. And then 5 is to extend and expand that network into the development zone so everybody has maximum proximity. The last set of criteria had to do with economics. These were really focused on value creation. And the first one we looked at was parcel frontage. We know that a parcel that has frontage on open space has a higher value and has a higher economic return. In this case, concept 2 performed the best, but they all do pretty well. And again, something that can be optimized in stage 3. This criteria looked simply at the quantity of residential that was proposed. And this had to do really with providing workforce housing and new types of housing that is currently missing from the market. So concept 1 really excelled in that evaluation, had a significantly higher proportion of residential opportunities. Criteria 4 was institutional capacity. Again, a straight line measure, but also had the added value of touching on something we learned in our reference project work, looking at other innovation districts, and that's that institutional presence in an innovation district is extremely important for their success. So concept 3 performed best in this criteria. And then the final one was office quantity and variety. So on the opposite end of the residential analytic is the office analytic. And concept 3 performed best. It has the most office and therefore the most potential job creation and economic potential. So these were, that was a quick tour through our 25 criteria. We then, here's the recommendations for economy. So again, this open space idea where people have maximum connection to open space, that keeps coming out as a important goal. Commit to a variety of housing types and parcel sizes to create choice in the market, create an institutional presence, and include, of course, substantial office development to maximize that economic development. We then were able to enter in the scores, as I mentioned earlier, a very simplified scoring system. It does not weight anything in any way. So every criteria has equal weight, which we can discuss. We know that certain things might be more important than others, but given that equal weighting and the simplified scoring, we did find that concept 2 in the middle category, shown in green, does perform best in the transportation, community, and sustainability tranches of criteria. Concept 1 and 2 were tied in the open space evaluation. And concept 3, no real surprise there, had the highest score for the economic criteria, since of course it was designed to maximize that element. So that was our evaluation exercise. And then I should say at the bottom here, we learned that concept 2 actually was did score the highest in a pretty clear way. Concept 1 was second, and concept 3 had the lowest score. Now, of course, as I said, many of the criteria, the results of each criteria element were very, very close, and this scoring methodology sort of exaggerates the differences between the metrics. So please take that into account. I think the second thing is we're not asking anyone to choose a concept today. We're really saying the purpose of this was really to see where the best how schemes did against different ideas, and then combine the best ideas together. So I'm happy to open it up for conversation and
yeah, thank you,
questions.
Peter. That was great, and I think it's really helpful to get that more fine-grained understanding of how these different concepts perform. And as you said, well, this isn't just a numbers exercise because we didn't weight the relative value of different criteria, and the scoring can exaggerate the differences. But I think it gives us an understanding and a story that's a little more detailed than just what looks good. So
Yeah.
we want to emphasize something that we've mentioned several times. We're not looking to say we're picking 1, 2, or 3. The reality is that we're trying to identify the best elements of any of these concepts and move them forward into a preferred alternative for the site. But in doing that, a starting place might be, is one of these alternatives or one of these concepts a better urban form to kind of be the foundation on which we build, kind of the Christmas tree on which we hang the other ornaments. Maybe just quickly as an initial exercise, I'll bring Steve in. And Steve, can you just kind of talk through just the urban form elements of these 3? And let's see if anybody's got preferences on whether there's a concept that is kind of the best base for us to build on.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, this is a little bit of a thought exercise, but you have to sort of mentally disassociate a lot of the scoring that you just heard about from the individual schemes, because the scoring to a certain degree is based on the program, and the program elements, land use program elements, can be moved, between the different schemes, which affect the scoring. Although on the other hand, a lot of the scoring is based on urban form. So I don't want to say that it's not relevant. It is, but one of the things that is important is to find an armature, on which to hang the Christmas ornaments, that we're testing with these different schemes. And and so the first scheme is, the original scheme that SOM came up with in their design competition to win the contract, and everybody, I think everybody believes it is a very strong scheme, in that it creates a series of individual districts that are very clear and very well demarked and separated by this linear open space system. And the linear open space system provides a lot of trail opportunity. It really provides a lot of access to open space by an edge condition to open space by the different districts. And another aspect of this one is that, our what we're calling what we call a land delivery system. In other words, how we're actually developing this site. The strategy is to create districts that have, some, that lean into certain land use mixes. Like some districts are going to be more residential, some are going to be more office and innovation, some are going to be more mixed use. And the idea is to find master developers that have expertise in those particular arenas, and bring them in and assign or allow individual master developers to do individual districts. And so this scheme is the cleanest and clearest in terms of subdividing the site into districts that could go to individual master developers, which is not by far the most important thing, but it is an additive measure. The regional hub scheme is one of the trends. If you look at a lot of future sort of progressive and future planning exercises, like Atlanta 2050, Los Angeles 2050, London, they all are, have one thing in common, and that is a desire to reintroduce green infrastructure, and green infrastructure being a continuous connected open space system back into the urban fabric of our cities. For the last 50 years, we've done just the opposite. We've pushed all the green out to the edges and paved everything, in the middle. And the idea is to reconnect to the natural systems, the rivers and the regional open space areas, and have a connective kind of tissue of open space back in. And so Alternative 2 does that very elegantly. It takes the Jordan River, where there's a lot of these days, and connects to that meaningfully with a major open space, and then links in through the site with what is sort of reflects almost a natural drainage system and biofiltration system back to the Jordan River, as well as trails and recreation, and then creates a hub, the red areas, the downtown, around a portion of that system, which could create a very distinctive, sort of downtown CBD kind of feel, organized around a piece of that kind of riverine open space linkage. The third scheme is creates is unique in that it creates sort of a very distinctive central park in the middle of the site. And think of this as a more European central park that would be passive. There could be a major amphitheater, outdoor, big gatherings, community gatherings. There could be a water element. There could be, and organized around that central park is the core area and the highest density. And then there's all the schemes are broken into districts, but in the third scheme, the districts cores are linked in with a open space, a car-free open space linkage, which allows probably more than the other schemes the opportunity to create a central car-free sort of pedestrian-oriented zone that links all the districts, meaningfully into kind of the central park area. So, in a way, it's probably got one of the highest levels of synergy of linking this peripheral areas into the core. but it lacks some of the other attributes that the other schemes have. So they're all, we think they're all very, very interesting and very, strong schemes, but they, as noted, they all have some slightly different attributes.
Thanks, Steve. And so we need to stop talking and listen a little bit more. But before we move on and get more detailed input, what are your thoughts, given those three concepts? Is there one that we ought to use or rely on a little bit more as kind of the baseline for including the different uses that we'd like to see? Or does anybody have a preference or thoughts on that?
Well, Alan, given that the conversation has been focused so much on the housing shortage in the Wasatch Front, I guess I wonder if that's a pressure to go with the higher percentage of housing than commercial.
No, I appreciate it, Scott, and that's a big issue certainly that a lot are looking at. I might suggest that on any of these baseline concepts, we could put in more residential. So talking a little bit less about the uses that would go on them because they can be mixed and matched, but more about that underlying urban form, the skeleton that would put the various uses on. But you make a really good point. That's on the minds of many of us in this region. Thank you. Okay. Not hearing. If you have other thoughts as we go, let us know. But let's go back more into that other discussion, which is as we move toward a preferred alternative for this site, what are elements that you see that ought to be moved forward that you'd like to see in the preferred alternative out of all of the things that we've discussed? And Scott, certainly your comment there is really relevant, that being able to provide some of the demand for residential housing in this region is something that we ought to be considering. So thanks. What other elements did you see that you like, that you don't like? What ought to move forward?
In addition to some of the kind of water-wise concepts that we talked about earlier in localscapes, just kind of reflecting back on some of our initial meetings and kind of how I recall this being proposed is that this would be a center for, more regional is how I interpreted it. Like, so it wouldn't just be solely a residential or complete community. So I like the elements of how can we bring in those areas surrounding the point into it. And then I think we also, and this wasn't really articulated, but I think it was raised up in a brainstorming session earlier, but the ability to communicate and educate residents, visitors, employees of the area on what is done to make this facility unique, this area unique. How is the water quality and stormwater runoff addressed? How is, some of the, I don't know, there's a lot of great things and a lot of great ideas. And I think there's an opportunity to capitalize on educating the public on what's unique about it. So I just wanted to highlight that again.
Thanks, Candace. Yeah, it's a good idea. And we have talked about that in the past, maybe putting up some signage that describes why something was done and how this particular design feature uses less water or cleans the water before it goes to the river or whatever it might be. That's a theme that we've heard from most of our working groups, that we look for ways to turn this into a community educational center as well. Thank you.
Candace, just along those lines, I think there's a interesting opportunity with option 2, say, where that story might be best articulated in that central linear open space. Would you prefer that it be sort of focused in one spot, or in concept one, where it might be a little more dispersed and present in multiple areas? And I think where I'm leaning anyway is maybe focusing that water story in a place where it's visible and we're able to communicate it in a really clear way is maybe the better way to go.
I agree. I think it would be really beneficial to have it communicated in like a clear way and where it makes sense in those areas, and whether it's on a dispersed way or the more kind of regional hub where there's kind of a one main thoroughfare.
Yeah.
I think you could do it either way, and I guess I can't speak about all the other things because I'm not the substantive expert on those things, but this is kind of like a relevant theme to that, to solar, like, or to air quality of how building design elements were put in place in this site development with those specific things in mind. I think we can all get better at understanding how we can grow better. And I think we have a real opportunity to showcase that here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Love it. Good stuff.
I might, Alan, if I may, just chime in a little bit. I going through the analysis, which was just really fantastic, thinking through so many aspects of each of these concepts. That was just really amazing, and I would love to see as a best practice for our region, seeing much more thoughtful analysis like that going into all kinds of developments. So let's capture that as a best practice. But some specific things, I've kind of gravitated towards number two as a general concept. I really like the recreation focus of the major open space along Bangalore Highway. Although I'd love to see a little more of that buffering along the I-15 corridor that's captured in concept one, that gets to some of those setback and buffer areas, and I think has the potential to make the Point of the Mountain corridor as more of a parkway than a really blighted freeway. We have not elegantly addressed our freeway corridors in this region. And I think we could do a lot better with that. And I think that that concept has the potential to do some of that, both the Bangalore Highway and the I-15, with these really kind of thoughtfully integrated open spaces as kind of buffers. But I really love the having that spine of green space become a central organizing community, and some larger kind of district open spaces that become major gathering nodes. I mean, those have the potential to include some of that central space in concept one that has the red around it. I think you could work that in some substantive ways around each of those little green nodes. These are bigger in scale than, say, Savannah, but having spent a fair amount of time there, and those wards and green spaces that have been so central to the organization of that community are just really wonderful. And I think this has great potential to do that. Interestingly, there is incredible precedent for this in Utah's settlement history. I don't know how familiar you are with the plat that led to the settlement of about 700 communities across the Rocky Mountain region. But this idea of having a quarter-mile walk to a central gathering place, which is really well reflected in concept two, and really, I think, an homage. I don't know if that was part of the thought process there, but it certainly has a lot of precedent in the early Latter-day Saint communities throughout the Rocky Mountain region, and has been heralded. I know Andres Dwani, a prominent planner, has talked about the loss of that as a planning module in
Yeah.
the Salt Lake area that was so central to the early settlements of Provo and Linden and Salt Lake and Pleasant
What's
Grove.
that document called, Soren?
Um,
Or what? Does it have a name?
the Plat of Zion
Okay.
was the planning module that was used by Brigham Young as the settlement of the West, and so Alan may be familiar with some of that. Michael Hathorn is probably one of the leading researchers in our community who's done just extensive work around how that concept can be used in contemporary planning as well.
Right. Great.
Yeah, this is a
Stakeholder.
predominant Latter-day Saint community, and so there might be some interest in seeing some modern interpretations of that concept as well. So anyway, those are a few thoughts that occur to me, and just kind of gravitating more towards that concept too, maybe bringing in elements of the others as well.
Thanks, Soren. Yeah, good thoughts.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Other thoughts?
Alan, this is John.
Hi, John. How you doing?
Fantastic.
Good.
Sorry that I missed previous meeting. I guess one thing that I heard I think I just heard it in concept 2, the regional hub, was sort of a central, I think the term tributary was used, surface water conveyance that would handle stormwater. And I think there's probably details on that I'm missing and probably aren't even fleshed out yet. But, I like the idea of open water. It's certainly a place where you can have educational information and places for people to be. What I don't really understand is how you get the water there, right? There's pluses and minuses. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about low impact development for managing stormwater. And in one sense, you'd like to handle it as locally as you can, as dispersed away as you can.
Right.
So that you don't have large runoffs to streams. But if you can move your stormwater to a central conveyance that can be a feature and not just a ditch that carries heavy runoff, so I guess maybe there's more to this and the other alternatives as well, similar ideas for managing stormwater. But I guess I'd like to understand a little bit or encourage that as we move water to a more central feature, that it is also being handled in sort of a low impact way, so that when it reaches the Jordan, that it is of good quality. I think there was also mentioned in the discussion of that alternative a wetland system at the end of that stream or tributary. Another good opportunity for education on water quality as well as for native species and that sort of thing. So I'm intrigued by those parts of the regional hub alternative.
Yeah, thanks, John. And John and his team have overseen the development of some low impact development documents that provide best practices shared with communities. And so I think there really is something there, and we've got a good head start on that, John, thanks to the good work of you and your team. Well, and we're optimistic that you are going to push that this development will help advance some of those ideas, both for others to see as well as to maybe even find better ways for doing things. Great. Thank you for those comments. Those are great. Anything else on, based on what you've seen so far on these different concepts, the rankings, the evaluation? Okay, I think given the fact we've got little time left and want to be respectful of your time, but also milk every great idea you have out of you before we wrap up. Want to turn to the last piece, and that is kind of refining work that's been done in the past on the key vision elements and key principles. I don't think we need to go through all of them, but Peter, I'd suggest maybe we start with the sustainability piece if we can, and see if there are additional ideas that this group wants us to be considering as we move forward. And we've captured some of those during this conversation already. And then if we have time, we'll go to transportation as well, which of course is closely related to the environment and air quality. But you remember this slide, we start with the key vision element, extracted out of that KVE, some principles we thought were important. And then associated with each of those principles are some initiatives that you've suggested in the past. And you'll see on the right, those initiatives, those in the yellow color are ones that were suggested during our last meeting. We just wanted to give you one more chance as kind of the experts in this area to see if we've captured the important ideas, and if there's anything that needs to be added to our considerations as we start getting into more detailed planning in stages 3 and 4. Peter, I'm sorry, I kind of took some of your introduction there, but anything you would add? Okay, well, let's just give you a minute to kind of look over the principles, the initiatives, think about whether you'd want to reword those, refine them, add to them, etc.
Sorry, Ellen, I was on mute there for a minute. I was just also going to say, Arthi's with us. She's our sustainable lead on the project, and she is also available to answer any questions, or if we need to dip into the sustainable chapter and just look at that quick. But we are advancing the sustainable chapter around 5 key elements: waste, water. Arthi, help me out here. Carbon,
ecology,
ecology, and
open space.
And sorry, what?
Open space.
And transportation too, right?
Oh, transportation. Sorry.
Yeah, right. So there is, in addition to what you're seeing on the screen here, there's a parallel and complementary idea around a custom sustainability framework for the project.
And Arthi's been really helpful, has a lot of good experience, matters relating to sustainability, and we're happy to go through that framework with you so you can see how a number of your ideas have been incorporated into the broader thinking on sustainability.
Yeah.
So if you've got nothing more on this slide, we can take a little bit of time and walk through that framework, if that'd be
Alan, let me just point real quick. I just shared a resource in the chat. For about the last year, I've been working with an organization called the Coalition for Clean Energy and Healthy Communities, which is really focused around the infrastructure legislation that's being contemplated at the national level. And there's 6 principles that have been the focus of this coalition. I put the website link there. I think these are already really well woven into what you've got on the page here. It might be worth a look at this if you're not familiar with the work of this coalition, which has about 40 organizations that are kind of leading environmental, wildlife, and social justice organizations in the US that have really brought together kind of the crux of those 3 elements into city planning and infrastructure development. I might just recommend that as a resource to further filter and add to some of the ideas that are in here. but this looks like a really great list. I love the additions that SOM's added as well.
Well, those were additions that came from the working groups. So
Yeah.
congratulate yourself. Good stuff.
And thank you, Soren. This is, I think one thing, just quickly opening the organization you connected us to, the Building Resilient Communities, which I think we have thoughts, and Peter's expressed some of those, but some of the topics like frontline communities, Indigenous and communities of colors, we haven't hit as hard. And I think it would be good to connect with them and see how we could bring some of that to the forefront. So really appreciate you sharing this.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but not far from this site is a monument or plaza that represents the 7 indigenous cultures that inhabited this location of the Salt Lake Valley over thousands of years of human history. And it would be really fascinating to weave elements of, some indigenous acknowledgement into some of the themes here. We're seeing that happening a lot more throughout Utah because we have such an incredible and rich indigenous history. Usually they're kind of expressed verbally, but I think weaving in ideas of indigenous acknowledgement into landscapes and landforms and emblems that can bring some of that recognition into the physical form of communities is important. And with the confirmation last week of Representative Holland leading now the Secretary of the Interior, I think we're going to see greater emphasis in this, and we certainly have work to do in our community and in breaking down some of those barriers that have been there for so long and acknowledging the communities that are among us and the histories that are here as well.
That's a good idea. I like that idea, Soren. And that monument that you spoke of, it's for those that don't know, it's along the Jordan River Parkway and on the other side of the Bangerter Highway from where we are. So not far from the.
It's just a stone's throw, and it could play in pretty significantly to this green connection between the mountains and the river. Taking elements of that and kind of weaving it from the Galena Preserve up into this development area as well. So take a look at that next time you're in the area. It's worth a walk down there just to capture some of that. A lot of that was discovered when the front runner line was being constructed, and some of these archaeological sites were unearthed. And there's, I think, opportunity for further exploration that's probably just barely scratched the surface at this point.
Yeah. Thank you, Soren. That's great.
Yeah.
Scott, you've got a comment, and then Candace.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the way these are worded, and just because I listen to a lot of the noise in the environmental advocacy community, terms like aim for and encourage and promote are often viewed as ways of giving lip service to an idea, but not really being committed to it. And I guess it's not clear how much control you have over these things, but and it isn't clear whether there will be metrics or accountability for these things. But I just wanted to bring that to the attention that sometimes the people who are really watching this closely are sort of more encouraged by words that connote a stronger commitment than this sort of "we'll try our best" kind of terminology.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think after we hear from Candace, we'll want to go to the sustainability structure or show some of the commitments that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. And back to Soren's suggestion, I love it. And I'm sure you guys don't need me to tell you this, but I think just working with tribal communities where applicable to have them be participants and helping lead that effort, if that is something we do, would be awesome. And they definitely would appreciate being included in those type of things. So
thank you, Candace. Yeah, that's great.
Candace, would you be able to connect us with those groups?
I have a few connections that I can help connect you with. And then there's also the Division of Indian Affairs that probably have additional connections from the state level, knowing the right people. But yeah, I'd be happy to, connect you with the contacts I have.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Well, Arthi and Peter, you want to run through this?
Yeah, Arthi, maybe you could give a 10-minute overview of where we stand on the sustainability. I'll go back to the beginning.
Sure. Okay, so just as part of the framework design phase 2, we started talking again, trying to clarify some of the questions all of you are having, and we were asking ourselves, how do we eventually get sustainability to be the overall umbrella? And what you're seeing now and what we're teasing out is sustainability. We're creating criteria. That's kind of step 1 in a parallel track to planning, landscape, mobility, and infrastructure design. And what we're moving towards is all of these ideas converging together, where the sustainability goals and aspirations are embedded in the framework design. So you're starting to see that with Pete's introduction, that it's making its way in, but there's still incorporation that needs to happen. And you'll see that as we talk about potential metrics. So if you go to the next slide. To the question about aspirational design and us being able to get it built, one of the case studies that we looked at was the 2030 districts. And the reason for that is what we see in terms of a gap between aspirations and getting it built is it's beyond just the financing, but it's also about a support structure throughout the life and operation of the development. So the 2030 district is a benchmark we're looking at closely because it's a private-public partnership that allows continuing ongoing conversation to keep the project very, very sustainable. To the next one. So just, again, we're trying to think, how do we get this embedded and within the project consistently? We've also thought about third-party certifications, and I know Pete has talked to you about that. Lead neighborhood development, many of you have heard of that. It's holistic. It's not hugely aspirational, but it's widely recognized. Well, community, Soren brought up some great points today about health and buffer zones. That's embedded in a system like Well. And then the Living Community Challenge, which is, we would say, the best of the best, world-class and exemplary in certain areas like net zero carbon or dechemicalization. So perhaps there are aspects of the project that can meet that. So ultimately, our recommendation was that we would have the custom framework, as Pete had mentioned, plus LEED ND, and within the custom framework, we would incorporate elements of the Well Community and Living Building Standard. And so, as Pete had mentioned, and I apologize, we were stumbling on our 5 areas, but we have 5 areas that we really want to focus on based on what we're seeing in the Draper Valley. And so 2 of them are focused on quality of life, mobility, and ecology, and 3 of them are focused on resource utilization. So energy and carbon, water, and waste. And so what we try to do, and this is again, trying to take out the ambiguity in our words, which we agree that's also, we want to be definitive, but we need to make some decisions before we can be definitive. So one of the ways that we tried to make that clear for everyone was to develop our goals in 3 buckets: good, better, best. And so when you think about it, we should always hit the good. Regardless, every category we should hit the good. We should push for the better in most options. Best, we can't get on every single option because they might have cost implications, but I think we're going to run them to the ground and try to get as many of them as possible. So loosely, that's what we're thinking about. And so you can see in mobility, of course, we're going to have compact and walkable districts, and we're going to prioritize comprehensive multimodal transportation. The best in this category is how do we get to adapt transportation systems where they're net zero emissions. So that's really future thinking and perhaps what we can't get today, but how do we build in for that? So if you go to the next. So then with each category, we went through and said, what are the specific metrics that it can get us to that best category? And we started breaking it down. So here you're seeing the start of that. And again, as we continue with design, a lot more depth will come in terms of the feasibility, the coordination with the other disciplines, and work with you in the working groups, and then also with other organizations to bring in bigger ideas. So again, 50% transportation carbon reduction, increase in adoption of electric vehicles. So how do we have that infrastructure? Access and frequency of transit, and then having a very extensive bike and walk network with some metrics around that. So when we get to ecology, a similar mentality, good, better, best. And so with good, of course, designing with nature, native and adaptive, and again, a weaving between the built and natural environment. Better is really reconnecting local hydrology, erosion and sedimentation control, and perhaps food production. And best is really designating habitat refuges and increasing biodiversity within the site. So ultimately, the ridge to river idea is the best in class. So if we go to the next, starting to think about metrics and then working very closely with our landscape team to refine these. But as you were seeing, all the schemes have 20 to 30% open space, so that's good. We want to move to have residential access very quickly, so within 2 blocks. And then in our best category, how much space can we preserve and have maintain as a biodiversity refuge, creating bio islands and having, we would say, landscape sequestration and ultimately improvement in biodiversity. Within energy and carbon, of course, good is minimizing operational carbon and accelerating the transition to renewables. Better is for us to have district heating systems. So that's going to be building on the history of the site where there were district heating systems. And then the best is the conversation many of you have been giving us insight into: no combustion on site, 100% renewable on and off site, and also prioritizing embodied carbon local materials. So what that might look like, so building on the history of district heating and ground source heat exchange, again, pushing on phasing for electrification, so earlier is better, as we all recognize. How do we push on that? Efficiency, can we have a 50% cut in code? You know, there's the start of conversations around how do we incentivize that? And then in terms of renewables, can we have 20% on-site with the rest off-site? And you saw from Pete's solar plotting that we've already started to think about rooftop availability. And then finally, with embodied carbon, how do we have 20% less material carbon with local materials? And perhaps, I think you can skip this one, Pete, for this. But yeah. So moving on to water scarcity, good, of course, is reducing water consumption within buildings, potable water, and then also minimizing water waste. Better is to have zero or greatly reduced irrigation and reusing rainwater for irrigation, which is now part of what we're working on with our landscape team. And best is to protect and restore ecosystems and habitats as they relate to water, and also treating gray water indoors. And we have recently found out too that there is a gray water treatment plant very close to the point. So there is the start of a conversation as to perhaps how we could tap into that versus building new infrastructure. So what we started with in terms of KPIs was to think about the surface hydrology. How do we filter everything that's on site and reconnect to the aquifer, decoupling storm and sewage so that filtered water is ultimately always clean, and even when there's a huge storm event. And then the potential for water storage for reuse. Efficiency is a no-brainer. Start with a 40% baseline reduction. And then potential ideas for reuse. So the collection of rainwater, potentially condensate recovery at a building scale, and as I had mentioned earlier, gray water reuse. I think we can perhaps skip this, but you can see that we're starting to think about the actual quantification of this and where the savings would come from, similar to how we were starting that conversation on energy and carbon. So finally, waste, I think we had seen, and we see this in many locations, that waste is really difficult. There isn't a cost benefit for it. And that was actually one of the reasons why we wanted to include it. So how can we encourage it over the life of a development that's going to unfurl over many years? And so in terms of good, how do we have ubiquitous access to recycling, making it very convenient? That improves recycling rates, minimizing construction and operational waste. Better could be promoting waste to energy, composting, and waste to material products and system strategies. And the best would be potentially demonstration zones that highlight waste reduction or waste to energy. There were also some direction or conversation about demonstration around pneumatic waste, which some of you might be familiar with that system. And so again, these are thinking about them in terms of KPIs. Can we improve the recycling rate significantly compared to statewide? So a 50% recycling rate. Can we have smaller demonstrations? And this is actually a very large example, but of waste to energy. And can we also divert construction waste? So a 75% diversion from landfill to avoid, our construction creating a lot of waste essentially. And I think that's it. It's been great hearing everything from all of you. We started also compiling some of our outreach contacts, and every time we talk, we hear more and more. So we're adding them to our list. So this is an incomplete list, and thank you today for sharing many more opportunities for us to collaborate and learn from local sustainability partners.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Arthi.
Yeah, thanks. So you can see that this has been a priority for us, and our team has been giving a lot of thought to how the concepts that you've generated over our conversations might be incorporated into the project. And love to hear any thoughts you have on what was just presented.
Well, Alan, I'll just jump in and say, and tell me how to say your name. Is it Arathi?
It's Arthi, like Dorothy.
Arathi. Okay,
yes.
Arathi. Well, thank you. This was really an incredible overview, and having been involved in the sustainability community, building community in Utah for many decades, it resonates deeply with me. So I really appreciate the work you've done. A couple of things that I might just add to what you've got already. And one of them is more of just kind of for your information. I really am interested in what's happening around carbon neutral building materials, which you referenced as kind of a best practice. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm chairing this year a professional interest group known as Urban Design Utah, which is a joint group of AIA, APA, ASLA, CNU, and others. And we are working to organize a low carbon material symposium, bringing in some expertise from around the country that will probably be sometime this summer. I'd love to keep Alan, you and your team apprised, you and Steve at least, and maybe others, because I think it would be valuable. A lot of the natural building materials have mostly been developed in rural areas, straw bale construction and things like that. There is a new section of the code. I think it's been adopted in Utah now, a straw bale construction section, at least of the residential code. I don't know if it's made its way into the IBC yet. But there is growing interest in seeing how natural building products can become part of more urban development, just because concrete and high density foam and other steel and other materials have such a large carbon footprint in their manufacture and eventual recycling. So would be fascinated to look at how that might be a possible way to help with carbon sequestration, and one that I hope to see will have a much bigger objective in Utah in the near future. The other one is, as we're looking at waste, I would also think about organic waste. You know, if we're going to have a hospitality sector here, we're certainly going to have you know, maintenance of green spaces and open spaces and things like that. So there will be a certain amount of organic matter that is derived both from human processes and hospitality systems and natural maintenance. And would love to see how that might be worked in as well, to create, you know, zero waste streams where organic matter becomes, you know, compost and fertilizer for new growth and development.
Awesome. Yeah.
Good thoughts. Thank you. Glade?
Yeah, on a previous slide, and it might have been a little further back, but there was some kind of mention of a kind of an air quality emissions reduction goal, and I think we talked about that in one of our breakout groups. Oh, I don't know, a month ago or something like that. And I guess I just wanted to offer Division of Air Quality's help in kind of thinking through how that might look, and that might be for down the road. It might be sooner rather than later. I'm not sure, but there's kind of a lot there to unpack about what kind of emissions we might expect to see on site and also induced or kind of external to that site, and how we might want to, you know, I think I saw a 50% reduction goal or something like that, and sometimes we kind of pull those out of a hat, or they're aspirational, but to try to tie those to potential strategies or something like that, I just want to offer we'd be happy to sit down and kind of workshop the inventory at some point and think more on that if it's helpful.
I think it would be, Glade. And again, it is heavily linked to our ability to electrify faster. And that's our principal strategy to reduce or improve air quality. So I think those two, our ability to do one will help us improve the air quality. So anything we can do on that end, I think will be very, very helpful.
Great. So yeah, if you ever want to do a, you know, talk offline or something about some ideas, we could do that.
You know, in terms of how this information is presented on the screen, you know, I don't know if sequence emphasizes priority at all, but you know, bike walk is obviously the lowest carbon approach, and so, you know, putting that consistently at the top of the list, I think there would be some value in that. You might be aware, some of you that know the area, Sugar House, about a little over a decade ago, went through a master plan transition that emphasizes walking and biking as priority for all decision making. And, you know, the implementation has, I happen to live in Sugar House and represented the area on the city council as we were instituting some of these policies. It certainly leaves some work to be desired on the implementation, which is not always realized that vision, but it is a consistent standard by which we measure all kinds of building projects and transportation investments and things like that. It was a big factor in development of the S-Line streetcar, for example. But you know, it's an important way to organize, and I would love to see this kind of development really take that bike ped or ped bike first approach, and really see that as it factors into all kinds of design decisions. You know, I look at 4th South in Salt Lake City, which is a major transit corridor between downtown and the University of Utah. And yet every project that's been built on 4th South since the tracks line went in around the time of the Winter Olympics, almost 20 years ago, the projects are all still designed around the automobile. They're not designed around transit. They're not designed around walkability, and it's really discouraging sometimes to see the systems in place to support that, and yet the development is not really, and decisions in the design of each building and each project are not made with the emphasis on bike and ped first. And so I would just offer that as a framework for how you think about, you know, everything from big scale to small scale around air quality and climate change, as how do we get people out of their cars, even if they're electric vehicles, which is great. The best choice is still the most low carbon one, which is to walk or ride your bike.
One of the sort of big ideas that you might have seen floating around in the schemes was what we called an auto-free zone. And one of the drivers of that is creating corridors of connectivity across the site that are not impeded or threatened by auto traffic or streets. And that if we had these auto-free zones and corridors, we could basically put active mobility infrastructure in that was more highly developed than you would normally see. In other words, rather than just a bikeway, it might be a higher speed bikeway or a pathway for some, you know, electrified micro mobility, you know, systems. And so we're pursuing that as an alternative to a more standard, you know, grid system where where all connectivity is in an auto-dominated environment.
Yeah, 16th Street Mall in Denver is a great example of, you know, really removing the automobile and focusing on all of the other ways that you can connect people through a highly urban district.
That's a good example. Yeah. Well, we've reached the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we're giving you your time back. But if anybody's got any concluding thoughts that you haven't been able to share, here's your opportunity. This isn't our last meeting, so there will be further opportunities. But anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up? Okay. Let me just say again, thank you, thank you, thank you. You are just, all of you contribute so much to our state and our community. You contributed to this process with creativity and thought and resources. And besides that, you're all friends, and I've worked with you over the years and have really enjoyed that. So many thanks to you. We will take the ideas that you've provided and put them in the notes. Let me just tell you what our next steps are. We've got 2 more working group meetings this week. Next week and the following week, we're going to have working sessions with our board and go through similar exercises and share with them recommendations that have come out of these working groups as well. And then on April 13th, at our regularly scheduled board meeting, we're hoping that the board will be prepared to give us direction on a preferred alternative going forward. That preferred alternative will be, you know, kind of as we described earlier, the armature, the Christmas tree, whatever you want to use, but the framework and around which we build the more detailed preferred alternative and master plan. We'll also be getting direction on the specific ideas that are getting carried forward to include on that plan. So as we said at the beginning, this is a critical time. Your input's been not just valuable, but invaluable. And so thank you very much. We'll be in touch. We're going to have another working group meeting to go over the preferred alternative and refining that. So that's kind of the next step for this group. But with that, appreciate all you do for us and for our broader community, and we'll be talking to you soon. Take care.
Thank you so much.